Chicago's Pluto case, the 93rd Street crash that became a homicide file. A car crash is supposed to explain itself. The damage tells you where the vehicle went. The debris tells you what it hit. The report tells you who was inside. And once the medical examiner signs off, the case is usually closed around one question: how did the crash happen? But on November 29, 2013, on Chicago's South Side, the first explanation did not survive the paperwork. Patrick Walker, known online as Pluto, was behind the wheel when the vehicle crashed near 1834 East 93rd Street. 4 people were inside. The scene looked like a traffic fatality. The first version of the story was simple enough for anyone to understand. A car lost control, hit multiple objects, and the driver died from the wreck. Then the autopsy came back, and the case stopped being a crash story because Patrick Walker did not die from the impact the way people first believed. The medical examiner found something that changed the entire investigation: a gunshot wound to the head. Now the car was not just a wrecked vehicle, it was a crime scene. The passengers were not just crash survivors, they became part of a homicide file. And the question changed from why did the car crash to what happened inside that car before it crashed. That is where the Pluto case starts getting deeper than the version most people know. Because online, Pluto's name usually comes up through Chicago drill history. People connect him to Lamron, 400E TYMB arguments, Lil Reese posts, Lil Durk lyrics, and that one-line fans still debate about hanging with strangers. The internet version moves fast. It turns names into theories, lyrics into clues, and Reddit comments into street history. But the official file moves different. The police report does not open with rap lyrics. It opens with a crash, a body, a vehicle, and evidence recovered from inside the car. That difference is the whole reason we built the full Pluto case file on TopTrendReportTV.com, because YouTube is not the place where I can lay out every raw report page, every reconstruction, every diagram, every witness contradiction, and every document screenshot without cutting the story down. The crash happened in the early morning. Around 5:10 a.m., police responded to the 93rd Street scene and documented the vehicle as part of a major accident investigation. Walker was the driver. He was later pronounced dead at Advocate Christ Medical Center. At that point, the scene had a built-in explanation: a wrecked car, a dead driver, multiple occupants, early morning crash conditions. If that had been all the file showed, Pluto's death may have stayed in public memory as a crash. But investigators recovered something that did not belong in a normal traffic fatality: a 9mm semi-automatic pistol and a fired 9mm casing. Those details matter, but the placement matters even more. The evidence was tied to the inside of the vehicle. The case was not built around an outside shooter running from the scene. It was not presented like a drive-by. It was not written like somebody pulled alongside the car and opened fire from another vehicle. The evidence pointed back into the car. That is where the story gets tight, because now every seat matters, every passenger matters, every statement matters. Who sat where? Who had access to what? Who remembered the crash? Who claimed not to know anything about a gun? Who was tested? Who was confronted later by detectives? In the full case file, we reconstructed the vehicle layout, because that is one of the parts you cannot just summarize in one sentence. A seating chart changes how you read the whole case. Once you see where the occupants were placed, where the report says the weapon was recovered, and where the casing was found, the investigation starts making more sense. But the public version rarely slows down long enough to separate that. People usually jump straight from Pluto's death into Durk lyrics and Reddit theories. The official file went through the car first. The medical examiner's finding forced the shift. Once the autopsy showed a gunshot wound to the head, detectives had to go back and reinterpret a scene that had already looked like a crash. That is the part that makes this case different. The crash was real, but it did not explain the death by itself. A wreck can hide evidence if people stop looking too early. In Pluto's case, the post-mortem finding pulled the case into a different category. The weapon evidence created one lane, the witness statements created another, and the lab work gave investigators something that memory could not: Gunshot residue testing became one of the strongest pieces in the official record. The report states that Ivory Isom tested positive for GSR on both cuffs of his hooded shirt. Another tested item came back with residue on one cuff and background particles on the other. One occupant did not have clothing available for testing. That does not answer every question by itself. GSR can show contact, proximity, or exposure, but it does not write the full scene out like a confession. It gives investigators a forensic layer when the people inside the car are not giving a clean explanation. And that is exactly what happened here. The witness statements were not clean. One occupant was described as very intoxicated and said he did not remember the accident or anything about a gun being inside the vehicle. Another occupant said he never saw a gun, never heard a gunshot, and did not know what caused the crash. That is one of the strangest parts of this file. A driver was shot in the head, a casing was found inside the vehicle, a pistol was recovered, GSR came back on clothing, and the statement still did not give detectives a simple version of what happened in that car. The case did not have the kind of witness account that lets the public say that is exactly how it happened. Instead, it left investigators working through physical evidence, lab results, the medical examiner's report, and later, digital evidence. That digital evidence is one of the pieces that makes the case feel modern, even though this happened back in 2013. Detectives later documented social media material connected to Isom holding a handgun before the crash. The report references still images and video evidence. When detectives confronted Isom with the video, he invoked his rights and stopped speaking. That moment does not need to be exaggerated. It already says enough. Investigators had a dead driver, a gunshot wound, a recovered 9mm pistol, a fired casing, GSR results, witnesses with limited statements, and then social media evidence that detectives believe mattered enough to bring into the interview. That is the official lane. Then there is the online lane, and the online lane is why Pluto's case never stayed buried inside one old police report. In Chicago drill spaces, Pluto became bigger than the case number. His name gets tied to Lamron, 400E, TYMB, Old Reese tweets, Dirk lyrics, Reddit arguments, and years of debate over whether his death caused tension, reflected existing tension, or became part of a bigger street narrative after the fact. Some users argue that Pluto's death deepened the issues between certain groups. Others say the problems already existed, but for some of the lyrics people quote. Some people point to Lil Reese posts from 2014. Others focus on Dirk references that sound like grief, blame, or warning, depending on how you interpret them. That is why the full case file separates the official record from the street story, because the police report is evidence. A lyric is context. A Reddit thread is public memory. An old post can show tension, but none of those things should be mixed together like they carry the same weight. That is where a lot of YouTube videos lose the case. They take the most viral interpretation and build the story around that. But with Pluto, the paperwork is actually more interesting than the rumor if you read it closely. The case is not just Dirk mentioned Pluto. The case is a traffic death that turned into a homicide file after the autopsy, with a 9mm casing inside the vehicle, GSR results, witness gaps, an arrest, and an online afterlife that made the death part of Chicago drill history. That is a much stronger story than the shortcut version. And it is also why we did not just post a raw PDF and call it a day. On TopTrendReportTV.com, the full file breaks down what the police report actually says, then shows how the public version formed around it. We reconstructed the crash sequence, the vehicle layout, the evidence recovery, the witness contradictions, and the way the case changed once the medical examiner's findings came back. The part I am not putting all the way into this video is the full document by document breakdown. That is in the case file. The raw CPD PDF is in there. The report pages are in there. The evidence visuals are in there. The reconstructed diagrams are in there. The street context section is in there. And the full file is built so you can see the difference between what is confirmed, what is alleged, and what people online are still arguing about. because if you only watch a video, you get the story. If you open the case file, you get the structure behind the story. By December 2014, the investigation had moved far enough for an arrest. Ivory Ison was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter. That charge matters because it does not frame the case the same way a first-degree murder charge would. It points toward a reckless act that caused death, not a publicly alleged planned execution. That legal detail is important, because online people often talk about Pluto's death like the meaning was already settled. But the official charge shows how prosecutors framed the evidence they had. It was not a case presented to the public as a planned hit. It was a homicide file built around what happened inside a vehicle and the reckless conduct investigators believe caused Walker's death. Still, the questions never fully disappeared. Why were the witness accounts so limited? How did a shot get fired inside the vehicle without the surviving passengers giving a clearer public explanation? What exactly happened in the moments before the crash? How much of the later online story came from real tension? And how much came from people trying to decode lyrics after the fact? Those are the questions that made Pluto's case survive beyond the police paperwork.